Before we begin, internalize one truth. Your security is a statistical error that you mistakenly accept as a constant. You walk on the thin ice of social hierarchies, not realizing that beneath you lies the abyss of those who are ready to devour your time, your energy, and your will simply because their will to power is stronger than yours. To a social predator, you are not a person. You are a set of chemical reactions, patterns of fear, and predictable cognitive biases. If you do not control the space, it is controlled against you. I am not here to comfort you or to teach you positive thinking. I am here to dissect the mechanisms of suppression and teach you how to turn your fear into fuel for a counterattack, using the cold steel of Friedrich Nietzsche's philosophy. Welcome to the real world. The kind do not survive here. Those who have realized their predatory nature survive here. Chapter 1. The Illusion of Moral Superiority, the Principle of Revaluation of Values. 1. The encounter phase. The boardroom on the 42nd floor smells of ozone and expensive antiseptic. Marcus Thorne, a CEO with the reputation of a butcher, sits at the head of the table. His silence has lasted for 3 minutes already. This is not just silence. It is a vacuum that sucks the air out of the lungs of his opponent, a young analyst named Ethan Hunt. Ethan feels the collar of his shirt becoming tight. His hands lie on the table, and he notices that his index finger is twitching almost imperceptibly. Marcus does not look at Ethan. He slowly turns the pages of the report, lingering on each page for a second longer than necessary. This is a microaggression. Finally, Marcus raises his gaze. His eyes are cold, his eyelids slightly closed, the posture of a dominant primate. "Ethan," he says in a quiet, almost whispering voice. A loud voice is a sign of insecurity. A quiet voice forces the victim to lean forward, exposing the neck. "Tell me, do you truly believe that these figures justify your presence here, or are you simply hoping for my Christian indulgence?" Marcus pauses, looking directly into Ethan's pupils, waiting for him to begin making excuses. An excuse is an admission of guilt. An admission of guilt is a capitulation. 2. The psychological X-ray phase. At this moment, Ethan's brain is under fire. The amygdala sends alarm signals, triggering a release of cortisol. His mouth becomes dry. This is a symptom of the activation of the sympathetic nervous system, which is preparing for a fight-or-flight reaction. But social norms force him to freeze. Marcus uses cognitive suppression by creating an information vacuum. When a person faces uncertainty and aggression, their brain tries to fill the void with the most logical explanation. "I did something wrong." Marcus does not attack the numbers. He attacks Ethan's very right to exist in this hierarchy. This is classic gaslighting in a professional environment, forcing the victim to doubt their competence by using high standards as a cover for ordinary dominance. 3. The psychological precedent phase. In 1961, Stanley Milgram conducted his famous experiment at Yale University. The essence was simple. A teacher, the subject, was required to give an electric shock to a learner for mistakes upon the order of the experimenter. Milgram proved a terrifying thing. People are ready to cause pain to others if the responsibility is shifted to an authoritative figure. But there is a reverse side. We submit to an aggressor because respect for status is hardwired into our firmware. Marcus Thorne imitates this status of the experimenter. Ethan obeys not Marcus's logic, but his projection of power. He sees Marcus not as a person, but as the law. Life example. Imagine a situation at a university. A professor named Doctor Sterling intentionally humiliates a student in front of the entire audience by asking a question that has no answer. The student blushes and stammers. Why? Because the group, the audience, creates a social pressure effect. The student fears not the professor, but the loss of social status in the eyes of peers. This is a biological fear of being exiled from the pack. 4. The counterstrike phase. Nietzsche taught, "What is falling, that one should also push." In this context, this means destroying the moral framework imposed by the aggressor. Ethan must apply lesson number 1, shifting the coordinate system. Instead of defending the report, playing on Marcus's field, Ethan must attack the very premise of the question. Action. Ethan takes a deep breath, straightens his back, lowering cortisol levels through a power pose, and maintains a return pause of 5 seconds. "Marcus," he replies, his voice steady and devoid of emotion. "My faith has nothing to do with this. We are not discussing my personality. We are discussing market expansion. If you see a flaw in the report, point it out. If not, let us proceed to the implementation schedule." Lesson number 1. Never make excuses to someone who is trying to intimidate you. An excuse is food for a predator. Return the dialogue to the plane of facts, ignoring the emotional hook. 5. The sensory immersion phase. The air in the office feels heavy, as if saturated with mercury. Ethan's reflection in the polished surface of the table seems alien and distorted. The sound of the clock ticking on the wall turns into a metronome, counting down the seconds to social collapse or triumph. Marcus feels that his infection of fear does not find a host. Power is a hallucination maintained by 2 people. Ethan has just stopped believing in it. Your fear is not your weakness, it is your biological incompetence. While you tremble, your opponent reads you like an open book. We continue to cut open the mechanisms of your enslavement. If the first chapter taught you not to make excuses, the second will teach you to embrace chaos and use it as a blade. Chapter 2. Amor Fati, the art of turning poison into medicine 1. The encounter phase. An evening reception in a mansion on the outskirts of London. The air is thick with the scent of expensive tobacco and old wood. Julian Vane, an aristocrat with the manners of a serial manipulator, presses Arthur Sterling against a marble balustrade on the balcony. Julian invades Arthur's intimate zone. The distance between them is less than 15 centimeters. This is an act of physical aggression disguised as social conversation. "Arthur, I have heard about your financial difficulties," Julian whispers. His lips stretched into a predatory smirk, but his eyes remain motionless. "The whole city knows that your fund is a house of cards. You do realize, do you not, that one phone call from me to the newspapers, and tomorrow you will be begging for alms at the entrance to your former office?" Julian places a hand on Arthur's shoulder and slightly squeezes the trapezius muscle. This is a control grip. He expects Arthur to start fussing, offering deals, or pleading. Arthur feels his heart pounding against his ribs and his palms becoming wet. 2. The psychological X-ray phase. What is happening here is what psychologists call an amygdala hijack. When Julian mentions the collapse, Arthur's brain perceives it not as a social threat, but as biological death. The hypothalamus instantly releases adrenaline and norepinephrine. Why does this work? Proxemics. Edward Hall established that a violation of personal space causes instant stress. Julian deprives Arthur of the opportunity to maneuver, causing claustrophobia at the neuronal level. Emotional contagion. The manipulator broadcasts confidence through a low timbre and absence of blinking, forcing the victim to feel defective. False dilemma. Julian narrows Arthur's reality to 2 options: obey me or starve to death. A brain in a state of stress loses the ability for creative thinking and chooses the lesser of two evils, submission. 3. The psychological precedent phase. In 1951, Solomon Asch conducted an experiment on conformity. A subject was shown cards with lines of different lengths and asked to find the matching ones. However, in the room sat Confederates who unanimously gave the wrong answer. The result was shocking. 75% of participants agreed with the obvious lie of the majority at least once. Why? Because the fear of being an outcast is stronger than logic. Julian uses this mechanism. He says, "The whole city knows," creating an illusion that Arthur is already exiled from the pack of successful people. If you believe that everyone knows, your will to resist breaks as you feel isolated. This is social deprivation in miniature. 4. The counterstrike phase. Nietzsche introduced the concept of amor fati, love of fate. This is not passive acceptance. It is an aggressive yes to any scenario, even the most terrible one. To defeat Julian, Arthur must kill the fear of newspaper headlines within himself. If you have nothing to lose, you become the most dangerous player at the table. Action. Arthur does not pull away. Instead, he himself takes half a step forward, reducing the distance to a critical minimum, and looks Julian directly at the bridge of the nose. This disorients the opponent's gaze. "Call them, Julian." "Right now," Arthur's voice sounds dry, without vibrations of fear. "I am even interested to see how you will explain your connections to my funds to the police when the investigation begins. I am ready to go to the bottom if you are the one who pulls me there. Let us check whose lungs can withstand more pressure." Lesson number 2. Accept the worst-case scenario as if it has already occurred. When you stop running from catastrophe, you deprive the manipulator of his only weapon, the fear of the future. 5. The sensory immersion phase. It becomes cold on the balcony. The wind brings the smell of salt from the Thames. Julian's fingers, still resting on Arthur's shoulder, begin to tremble slightly. He did not expect the victim to throw himself onto the knife. At this moment, the hierarchy flips. The noise of the party behind the glass door seems like distant white noise. There is only the cold granite of the balustrade and the realization. The predator has turned into prey because the prey has stopped fearing death. Your pity is not a virtue. It is a parasite that sucks out your will to live to feed those who are too weak to create on their own. Pity is a form of contempt wrapped in a beautiful package of humanity. If you feel guilt for your strength, success, or intelligence, congratulations, you have been infected. You have become a hostage of slave morality. Today, we dissect resentment, the most dangerous tool in the arsenal of social parasites. If you recognized yourself or your past reactions in the described patterns or character behavior, put a plus in the comments. This is not a sign of weakness, but the first signal that your brain has begun the process of deconstructing old habits. Chapter 3. The Virus of Resentment, the Psychology of Moral Blackmail. 1. The Encounter Phase. A charity evening in a Manhattan penthouse. Glass, crystal, and fake smiles. Oliver Thorne, a venture capitalist whose fortune is measured in billions, stands by a panoramic window. Silas Vance slowly approaches him. Silas looks exhausted. His suit is clean, but fits him like a skeleton. He is Oliver's former partner who failed his part of the deal 10 years ago and has lived in the shadow of someone else's triumph ever since. "Oliver," Silas's voice is quiet, with a slight rasp that triggers an instinctive desire to listen. This is an acoustic capture of attention. "I look at this city and think, At what cost did all of this come? My family lost everything when you pressed the button on the merger. My daughter is now working 2 jobs to pay my bills from the clinic. Silas does not shout. He looks at Oliver with the eyes of a beaten dog. He uses a visual anchor of suffering. I do not blame you, Oliver. Just, sometimes I wonder how you sleep at night, knowing that your foundation is built on our bones. Oliver feels a strange coldness in his stomach. This is not fear of Silas. It is cognitive dissonance. His brain is trying to reconcile the image of a successful leader with the image of an executioner that Silas is imposing on him. 2. The psychological X-ray phase. Silas is performing surgical operation on Oliver's psyche using the mechanism of resentment. Inversion of values. According to Nietzsche, a weak person cannot defeat a strong one in a fair fight. Therefore, he changes the rules of the game. He proclaims strength as evil and weakness and suffering as good and holy. Silas makes his poverty a moral advantage. Injection of guilt through oxytocin. When we see someone else's suffering, our brain releases oxytocin, the hormone of empathy. This is an evolutionary survival mechanism of the species. Silas exploits this biological vulnerability, turning the hormone of trust into poison. False causal link. He links his failure to Oliver's success. In psychology, this is called an external locus of control. The manipulator convinces the victim that their well-being is the direct cause of his unhappiness. Zero-sum game fallacy. 3. The psychological precedent phase. In 1967, Martin Seligman conducted a series of experiments that discovered the phenomenon of learned helplessness. Dogs were placed in cages where they received electric shocks that they could not escape. Later, when the cage was opened, the dogs did not even try to leave. They simply lay down and whined. Silas is Seligman's dog that has learned to use its whining as a weapon. In a social context, learned helplessness becomes a strategy. The manipulator demonstrates a total inability to cope with life so that the strong one, Oliver, feels a biological obligation to take him in tow. This is a parasitic symbiotic relationship. Life example. Look at the dynamics in the office. Your colleague, Julian, constantly forgets how to use a program or complains about pressure. You, being a good guy, do the work for him. Julian uses his incompetence, weakness, to dominate your time. He is not a victim of circumstances. He is a strategist of laziness. 4. The counter-strike phase. Oliver must realize Silas does not want help. He wants revenge. He wants to see Oliver unhappy to justify his own insignificance. Lesson number 3. Radical egoism and breaking the distance. Nietzsche called for the pathos of distance. You must recognize that you and your opponent are on different rungs of the evolutionary ladder. His suffering is his choice, or his fate, and you are not obliged to pay for it with your energy. Action. Oliver takes a sip of whiskey without looking away. He does not make excuses and does not offer money. Money is an admission of guilt. Silas, he says, and there is metal in his voice. Your daughter works 2 jobs because you taught her to give up, just as you gave up yourself. You do not blame me? A lie. You have lived for nothing else for the last 10 years, but your failure is not my debt. It is your biography. If you came here for pity, you have come to the wrong address. We celebrate will here, not defeat. Lesson number 3. Do not let the weak define your moral categories. Your success is your right. The one who tries to cause you a feeling of guilt for your strength is your most dangerous enemy. Cut them off without a shadow of a doubt. 5. The sensory immersion phase. Silas freezes. For a moment, pure, unfiltered hatred flashes in his eyes, the true face of resentment. The mask of the victim falls away. In the penthouse, the hum of the air conditioning system becomes audible, sounding like the low growl of a predator. Oliver feels the weight in his stomach disappear. He is no longer the executioner. He is the master of his reality, who has just thrown the rotting corpse of someone else's past off his shoulders. The air becomes cleaner. Truth is not what is pleasant to believe, but what works in conditions of a total war of interests. Most people are afraid to seem weak because their ego is too fragile. But for a true strategist who has mastered the spirit of Nietzsche, weakness is not a state, but a camouflage. If you always demonstrate strength, you become a predictable target. You force the enemy to mobilize. But if you let them smell your blood, a smell that you synthesized yourself, they will relax, and at that moment, their throat will be in your teeth. We move on to studying radical pragmatism and the tactics of false vulnerability. Chapter 4. The Trojan Horse of the Psyche, Radical Pragmatism. 1. The encounter phase. A glass office in the city of London. Walls from floor to ceiling expose the city, which seems like an endless scheme of lights. Inside is a sterile silence, broken only by the hum of the climate control system. Victor Draken, a corporate raider known for his ability to open people over a single dinner, sits opposite Clara Vance. Clara is the head of a technology startup that Victor intends to swallow for a pittance. Victor dominates physically. He is sprawled in his chair, his legs wide apart, one hand carelessly thrown behind his back. Clara, his voice sounds with a laziness full of condescension. Your attempts to hold the board of directors remind me of the dance of a butterfly under a boot. You have already lost. Just admit it, and I will leave you enough so that you can buy yourself a house in Provence and forget about this nightmare. Clara does what Victor expects the least. Her shoulders drop. She begins to rub the edge of her jacket, a nervous, repetitive gesture, a manipulation imitating a loss of control. Her breathing becomes shallow. I just do not know what to say to the investors, Victor. Her voice trembles. She avoids his gaze. They believed in me. I feel so helpless. Victor leans forward. Triumph flashes in his eyes. This is the winner's glow. He sees a broken woman before him and decides to finish her, not noticing that Clara intentionally left her laptop open so that he could see a confidential file titled Asset Liquidation Plan, Secret. 2. The Psychological X-ray Phase. At this moment, Victor is in the trap of his own neurochemistry. When we feel victory, our hypothalamus gives the order for a powerful release of dopamine and testosterone. This combination creates a tunnel vision effect. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical analysis and caution, is suppressed. Victor stops looking for a catch because his brain is already celebrating triumph. Mechanisms in action. Dunning-Kruger effect. Inversion. Victor is so confident in his superiority that he considers Clara incapable of a complex game. He underestimates the opponent based on a stereotypical perception of female weakness. Sensory deception. Clara uses micro-expressions, brief flashes of fear, raised eyebrows, dilated pupils, that she imitates. Victor reads them as sincere because they confirm his expectations. Tactical empathy, in reverse. Clara does not empathize with Victor. She scans his need for dominance and feeds him exactly the reaction that makes him feel like a god. 3. The psychological precedent phase. In 1966, social psychologist Elliot Aronson described a phenomenon known as the pratfall effect. The essence of the experiment was that people who were considered highly competent became more attractive and safer in the eyes of others when they made a small mistake, for example, spilling coffee. In the context of dark psychology, this works to detonate vigilance. When a strong object demonstrates a flaw, those around, including aggressors, subconsciously lower their level of defense. Life example. Recall the negotiations between two lawyers, Samuel and Richard. Samuel intentionally came to the meeting with an unbuttoned button on his shirt and constantly forgot the name of one of the minor documents. Richard, deciding that Samuel was a dilettante, relaxed and missed a clause about penalty sanctions in the main contract, which eventually ruined his client. Samuel used the mask of a fool to hide the sharpness of a sword. 4. The counter-strike phase Nietzsche wrote, "A person of the will to power must be able to be both a lion and a snake, but above all, he must be able to be ice." Radical pragmatism requires throwing away pride. If for victory you need the enemy to consider you a non-entity, give them that. It is precisely at the moment when Victor, blinded by dopamine, reaches for the secret file on Clara's laptop, which in reality contains a spy virus or misinformation destroying his own strategy, that Clara strikes. Action. Clara instantly changes her posture. The trembling in her hands disappears. She looks Victor directly in the eyes with a cold, evaluative gaze. "Victor," her voice now sounds like a whip crack, "while you were enjoying my hysteria, you just confirmed receipt of a document that legally links your company with the fictitious accounts indicated in this file. Your overconfidence has cost you your career. You looked for a victim, but you found a mirror." Lesson number 4. Use someone else's arrogance as a lever. Your sham weakness is an ideal bait. Let the enemy believe in their invincibility, and they will dig their own grave, too busy with self-admiration. 5. The sensory immersion phase. It suddenly becomes too quiet in the office. The light of the lamps reflects in Victor's eyes, which are now full not of triumph, but of sticky, cold realization of collapse. The air feels dry and prickly, like sand in a desert. Clara slowly closes the laptop lid. The sound of the click sounds like a shot at point-blank range. She stands up and her shadow, lengthened by the evening sun, covers Victor's figure, who has suddenly begun to seem very small in his huge chair. Your great noon has arrived. In Nietzsche's philosophy, this is the moment of the shortest shadow, when a person stands at the peak of their awareness and no longer needs idols, excuses, or someone else's recognition. This is the moment when you stop fighting the enemy and begin to annihilate them, not physically, but as a significant psychic entity. The last lesson is a lesson of total sovereignty. You are no longer a victim, not a hunter, and not even a player. You are the environment itself in which others are trying to survive. Chapter 5. The Great Noon, Burning the Idol, the Law of Total Sovereignty. 1. The Encounter Phase. The annual charity gala concert at Lincoln Center. The glitter of diamonds, the noise of hundreds of voices, and the smell of old money. Dominic Vance, a media tycoon accustomed to the fact that his presence causes either awe or nausea, decides to arrange a public execution of his protégé, Julian Thorne. Julian has just made a deal bypassing Dominic. Dominic approaches him in the center of the hall when a dense circle of New York's elite forms around them. He speaks loudly so that everyone can hear, using the technique of public devaluation. "Julian, my boy," Dominic slaps him on the cheek, a humiliating gesture emphasizing hierarchy. "You do realize, do you not, that without my name on your business cards you are merely a waiter in an expensive suit? Your deal is a theft from the one who created you. You are not a traitor, you are simply a mistake of my personnel policy. Dominic laughs, and those around, led by social conformity, begin to chime in. This is the moment of social death. Julian must either explode with anger, confirming his instability, or make excuses, confirming his guilt. But Julian does something else. He looks through Dominic. Not at him, but precisely through him, as if Dominic were transparent glass. His face is absolutely motionless. He does not remove Dominic's hand from his cheek. He simply ignores its presence, as if it were a leaf of a tree that touched him. 2. The psychological X-ray phase. Julian applies ontological denial. In psychology, this is the highest form of defense and attack simultaneously. When you react to an aggressor, you confirm their reality and their power over you. When you ignore them completely, you deprive them of their narcissistic resource. Mechanisms in action. Deactivation of mirror neurons. Usually, when someone shouts at us or humiliates us, our mirror neurons force us to experience reciprocal emotions. Julian forcibly suppresses this reaction through the prefrontal cortex, breaking the emotional connection. Status de-escalation through absence of reaction. In ethology, if an alpha male displays aggression and the subdominant does not react, does not submit, and does not attack, the alpha finds himself in a state of cognitive deadlock. His aggression does not find a hook, and he begins to look ridiculous in the eyes of the pack. Narcissistic injury. For a type like Dominic, the most terrifying thing is not hatred, but indifference. His brain, accustomed to dopamine releases from the recognition of his power, suddenly faces a sharp drop in neurotransmitter levels. This causes panic and a loss of control over the frame of the situation. 3. The psychological precedent phase. In 1971, social psychologist Henri Tajfel formulated social identity theory. He conducted experiments with minimal groups, proving that people tend to divide the world into us and them based on the most insignificant criteria. But the most interesting part of his work is the concept of social comparison. Our status exists only as long as those around us agree to compare it. If you move yourself beyond the limits of this scale, if you stop being a student or a protege, the aggressor's hierarchy collapses. You create your own group of one person that cannot be attacked by the rules of the old group. Life. Example. Recall the case with Professor Dr. Aris, who tried to humiliate a student named Leo for a stupid question. Leo did not start to argue about science. He simply closed his notebook, stood up, and began to look out the window at a flying bird while the professor held forth. After 30 seconds, the professor went silent because his speech had turned into the monologue of a madman. Leo did not win the argument. He annihilated the situation of the argument itself. 4. The counterstrike phase. Nietzsche proclaimed, "God is dead." In your microcosm, this means the idol is dead. The aggressor has power over you only as long as you believe in their significance. Lesson number 5. Become the sun. The sun does not fight the darkness. It simply shines, and the darkness disappears by itself. Your counterstrike is achieving such a degree of internal autonomy that the barking of dogs outside the window and the shouts of a tyrant in the office carry the same semantic load for you. 0. Action. After 10 seconds of dead silence, Julian slowly shifts his gaze to the glass of champagne in his hand. He takes a sip, then turns to the investor standing nearby and continues the interrupted conversation. So, as I was saying, the profit forecast for the third quarter is 12%. He did not say a word to Dominic. He did not look at him. Dominic remained standing with his hand raised, turning from a great maniac into a comical old man who is ignored at his own party. Lesson number 5. True power is not the ability to win in a conflict. It is the ability to not notice the conflict. When you become psychologically invulnerable, the aggressor turns into noise, and noise cannot intimidate. It can only be annoying. 5. The sensory immersion phase. It becomes unnaturally quiet in the hall. One can only hear the gas bubbles bursting in the crystal. The air feels cold and transparent, as in the mountains. Julian feels an incredible lightness in his spine. Dominic's shadow, which used to seem huge and ominous, is now barely visible on the marble floor, a small gray spot at the feet of a person who has finally become free. The great noon has arrived. The shadows have disappeared. Final synthesis. The philosophy of steel. The dissection of your former personality is complete. Only the scraps of your illusions about justice, moral duty, and security remain on the laboratory table. We have dissected your fear, studied the neurochemistry of your submission, and burned the idols to whom you allowed to dispose of your will. Now you stand at the point that Nietzsche called the Great Noon. The world around you has not changed. Social predators still prowl in search of easy prey. Corporate tyrants still try to expand their territory at the expense of other people's lives. And the weak continue to weave nets of guilt, hoping to strangle your strength in them. But your optics have changed. Where before you saw an insurmountable wall of someone else's authority, now you see only a set of predictable patterns and hormonal surges. Where you felt the cold sweat of fear, now pulses the will to power, a pure desire devoid of moralizing to determine your fate independently. Man is a rope tied between beast and overman, a rope over an abyss. You have crossed this rope. You have learned to maintain a pause when excuses are expected from you, to accept chaos, turning someone else's aggression into your lever, to cut off pity, realizing that it is poison for your autonomy, to use a mask, hiding your true sharpness under a layer of sham vulnerability, to disappear as a target, becoming transparent and unreachable for the enemy. Sensory epilogue. Beyond this text begins your real hunt. The air in your room feels thinner and cleaner, as on the peaks of the Alps, where Nietzsche sought his truths. You no longer hear the noise of the crowd, only the steady rhythm of your own breathing and the quiet click of the lock closing on the cage of your past. Your silence now is not a sign of defeat. It is the silence before a lightning strike. Your politeness is not weakness, but a distance that you have established yourself. You no longer seek approval in the eyes of others, because the only mirror that matters is your own awareness of your strength. Go and rule, not because you want to cause pain, but because you no longer allow it to be caused to yourself. Knowledge of the mechanisms of the psyche is your main freedom. Subscribe to explore the hidden facets of human behavior together, and be sure to write in the comments which psychological pattern or strategy we will analyze next time. Let us seek the truth together.